good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where this finds you, and a warm welcome to this 7th webinar in a series of events that UNIDIR is organising with our colleagues in UNODA, along with the Chair and the Friends of the Chair of the Biological Weapons Convention Working Group. These webinars are intended to support ongoing activities of the BWC Working Group, and we hope we can stimulate some thinking and some discussion on some key topics during intersessional periods. You can find more information on the webinar series through the link that my colleagues will put in the chat. And at the outset, I should note this event is being recorded and we'll make this recording available to the public online in the coming days. This particular event, I think, is particularly important as we're focusing on the rolling text that the Chair has prepared for the 6th session of the working group, and also hope to get an update on some of the proposed mechanisms on S&T and international cooperation, as well as measures on compliance and verification. Just as a note, my ISU colleagues have informed me that the rolling text will be made publicly available on the UNODA meeting place website for the 6th working group session in a couple of days. I think this will be down as CRP1. Perhaps my colleagues could add a link to that in the chat as well. We thought it might be useful to discuss this after a bit of a gap in formal BWC sessions, and perhaps serve as a refresher for those of you who I sincerely hope have taken some leave in recent weeks ahead of what is going to be a busy autumn. So to do this, we have a panel of excellent speakers who are familiar with these issues. I'll begin the panel discussion shortly, and I'll follow this with a Q&A session in which we welcome input from all of you. To do so, if I could ask you to use the Q&A function, which can be found at the bottom of your screens. And please do note that for questions and comments will be treated anonymously by default. But if you do want a question or comment to be attributed, please put your name and affiliation in the text there. And we will try to get to as many questions as possible. So with that short introduction, I'm delighted to give the floor to Ambassador Meyer, the permanent representative of Brazil to the CD and chair of the BWC Working Group. Ambassador Meyer, thank you for taking the time to join us. I'm hoping you could provide some opening remarks and tell us a little bit more about the rolling text and your expectations for the working group meeting later in August. And the screen is yours, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, and dear participants. Let me begin by expressing my deep appreciation to UNIDIR for hosting this timely and forward-looking discussion. It's a pleasure to join this webinar and to share some introductory reflections on the rolling text that I have had the honor to prepare as chair of the BWC Working Group on Strengthening the Convention. Although I have this paper prepared, as you know, I didn't have the honor to prepare myself. You see, I have to put a lot of people, a group, and a team that was able to prepare this paper. Anyway, as many of you know, the working group was established by consensus at the 9th Review Conference of the BWC in 2022, with a general mandate to identify, examine, and develop specific and effective measures across the 7 thematic areas. In addition to the 2 specific mandates on developing with a view to establishing a mechanism on international cooperation and another mechanism on scientific and technological developments. Over the past 2.5 years, we have worked collectively to navigate a complex agenda and build common ground, sometimes slowly, often incrementally, but with a steady engagement and a shared commitment to the objectives of the convention. The rolling text circulated last week represents the first comprehensive effort to translate the process under the general mandate into a working draft. It is not a draft outcome yet. Rather, it's a tool, a textual framework that captures the most promising lines of convergence and offers language that could eventually serve as the basis for consensus. Its aim is to consolidate discussions under the 7 substantive topics and provide a structured starting point for the working group's 6th session to be held from 11th to the 22nd of August. In preparing this text, I was greatly assisted by the wise and generous input of the Friends of the Chair and by the tireless technical support of the ISU and of Leandro, who is my right and left hand. I'm grateful to them for all the quality of their contributions and for their dedication. The text is guided by a principle of balance between ambition and caution, between precision and openness, where consensus was visible. I tried to crystallize it. Where divergence persists, I tried to preserve space for further discussion by proposing streamlined, broadly accepted language. In some cases, this meant reframing sensitive elements in ways that foreground national level actions were preserving their international relevance. In all sections, I chose to retain the spirit of previous proposals while avoiding prescriptive detail so that our discussions as of Monday can be guided by practical questions rather than doctrinal disagreements. Importantly, the rolling text does not address the 2 institutional mechanisms that has also been under advanced negotiation in the working group. This remains a central focus on our work. However, given the feedback received from many delegations and in a view of distinct nature of the mandates involved, I have decided to treat the mechanism as a separate track of negotiations, which will continue in parallel during the upcoming session. This separation should not be seen as downgrading of the mechanisms. Quite the opposite. It's a way to allow for deeper, focused deliberation on their remaining parameters, while preserving the integrity of the rolling text process. Looking ahead, my expectation is not that we resolve all difference in a matter of weeks. Rather, it's that we use this moment to sharpen the contours of potential consensus, to refine our proposals, and to advance towards a substantive outcome that reflects the shared values and aspirations of the BWC community. The rolling text is a first draft. What matters now is what we make of it together. I look forward to hearing your reflections, suggestions, and comments. The success of this process depends on the collective responsibility of the membership on a sense of purpose inspired by the urgency of emerging risks. Thank you.
Many thanks, Ambassador, for the introduction to the rolling text, the first draft or textual framework, as you've termed it, as well as the overview of plans for the working group meeting. I think that's really useful, and certainly I really appreciate you sharing your insights and your vision for the way forward. So thank you, sir. I'd now like to turn to Ambassador Robert Indenbosch, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, the Conference on Disarmament. Ambassador Indenbosch is also the Friend of the Chair on measures related to compliance and verification, together with Alonso Martinez from Mexico. And they're leading work on what is an important and frankly quite difficult topic of compliance and verification within the BWC working group. I think it's also an area where it's fair to say we've seen some constructive and interesting discussion over the last couple of years. So, Ambassador, I'd be grateful for your views on the evolution of the discussion topic of compliance and verification, and of course, where you see this going. And the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you for this introduction. Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Many thanks to UNIDIR for organizing this BWC webinar series in which the friends of the chair are given the opportunity to share the latest state of play on their topics. Let me add to that my gratitude to the chair of the BWC working group, Ambassador Meyer, for his guidance given over the year. Speaking also on behalf of my Mexican colleague Alonso Martinez, who is co-facilitator on compliance and verification, I think I can say we can look back at an excellent and certainly interesting discussion last December. In general terms, the main takeaway from previous discussions, as well as from the consultations and workshops that followed throughout the year, is the importance delegations attach to the concept of compliance and verification. At the same time, given that compliance and verification was not formally discussed for over 2 decades, the discussions are at a more exploratory stage than those on other topics. This gives a certain positive momentum to our discussions, and I would like to emphasize that state parties have really put in the effort. In addition to serious in-depth discussions in the formal plenaries, several working papers and side events have helped explore both conceptual questions and practical approaches to developing measures regarding compliance and verification. This has helped to clarify the positions of state parties and made it feasible to us to assist the chair in shaping the compliance and verification section of the rolling text just presented. This does not mean we are done. Rather, we should work to further refine the text and narrow down divergences in the run-up to the RevCon in 2027, so that the working group can ultimately give clear, consensus-based recommendations on how to proceed with this complex and difficult topic. Let me now give you a brief refresher and taking stock of the current challenges. Unlike other disarmament treaties, the BWC does not include a mechanism for verifying compliance among state parties. There is, for instance, no mechanism for inspecting states' facilities, auditing biological activities, or ensuring that they comply with the BWC. Since many biological technologies have legitimate civilian uses, such as in medicine, agriculture, and research, one challenge lies in distinguishing between legitimate activities and those prohibited under the Convention. Another issue that adequate resources, financial, technical, and knowledge-wise, are necessary for the effective monitoring and verification of compliance. State parties may lack the resources to implement robust monitoring programs or to support international verification efforts on their own. Finally, there's the challenge of the ever-evolving biotech landscape. Novel pathogens, emerging biotechnologies, and synthetic biology further complicate our ability to monitor and verify compliance with the Convention. In particular, advances in biotechnology may increase the ability of state and non-state actors to develop biological weapons in small or improvised laboratories, further complicating meaningful verification efforts. On taking stock of opportunities, the issue of compliance and verification has been examined since the BWC came into force, throughout its review conference, as well as by VEREX and the ad hoc group. Insights from this previous work remain valuable. However, the context in which state parties last considered these topics over 2 decades ago has changed significantly due to the rapid advances I just mentioned. It's therefore necessary to address the topic with a fresh approach. A recurring theme throughout this working group's deliberation is the possibility to learn from other international organizations. International organizations like the World Health Organization, the World Organization for Animal Health, and others could support future verification efforts by providing expertise, sharing data, training, and technical support. And while the biological domain is different than the chemical and nuclear one, lessons can also be learned, for instance, from the IAEA and OPCW. Last and perhaps most important for the context of our work, there seems to be a general will among state parties to strengthen compliance and verification within the context of the Convention. Some state parties put emphasis on preventive measures, while others value the idea of ex post facto investigation. Nevertheless, there seems to be a universal recognition of the need to strengthen the Convention to fully reflect the context we now find ourselves in, and to ensure that enhancing the Convention is done in a future-proof manner. Our job is, and I'm now quoting, to identify, examine, and develop specific and effective measures, including possible legal binding measures, and to make recommendations to strengthen and institutionalize the Convention in all its aspects. The way I read this is that we should work primarily on what we will ultimately present to the 10th Review Conference. The Friends of the Chair took a first step at this last December with a food for thought paper under the guidance of the Chair, and we will continue to consult state parties and relevant stakeholders to further update what should ultimately become the working group's recommendations to the Review Conference in 2027. And this will not be an easy task, as there are still divergences to bridge. Examples of that include the scope of verification, for instance, compliance with which articles of the Convention would need to be verified, the desirability and role of on-site inspections, the extent to which we should or should not explore possible linkages with confidence building measures and national implementation. And last but not least, the institutional and financial implications of possible future verification measures. Ultimately, these discussions will have to be boiled down to something that is politically acceptable, technically feasible, and financially sustainable. And this is not a matter we can already resolve in the working group. After all, I've said it before, VERICS have more weeks per year than we have hours. For this reason, and based on discussions during earlier sessions of the working group, we included in last December's Food for Thought paper the idea of a new platform, now an open-ended working group in the points proposed by the Chair, to continue the work on compliance and verification in a focused manner after the 10th Review Conference. As friends of the Chair, we do not have a specific preference for the way we design the recommendation for such a working platform, but if states are willing, we will be honored to help structure such discussions later this month and beyond. And with beyond, I mean, for example, to assist state parties in advancing their understanding of the topic. To mention an example, Mexico, Switzerland, and the Netherlands have organized over the past year several regional workshops for capital-based experts. The first of these workshops took place in Mexico City on the 27th of September 2024 for states in the Latin American and Caribbean region. The second was held in Manila, and the most recent one in Addis Ababa on the 9th of June. These efforts are intended to assist interested state parties to catch up on the rich history of compliance and verification, and to suggest possible pathways that can feed back into our formal discussions, and ultimately into the working group recommendations for the REFCON. In closing, let me reiterate that the friends of the Chair, and by extension the Chair himself, are the hands of the room. As friends of the Chair, we can assist, analyze, and moderate discussions, but ultimately it's the will of states parties, including my own country, to arrive at consensus on the way ahead. And we look forward to today's discussion and future discussions, and I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for a really useful overview. I'd also echo the important point you raised on the immense changes in science technology over the last 20 years and the implications that has for verification. Thank you also for raising and mentioning the open-ended working group proposal, that's been raised in the rolling text. I think it is not an easy task, but I appreciate you giving your time today, so thank you. Before continuing, a quick reminder that you can leave questions for our speakers through the Q&A function. We will get back to those questions once we hear from all our speakers, but don't feel you need to wait. Please do submit those. But for now, though, I'd now like to turn and offer the floor to Ms. Christian Hope Reyes, Third Secretary and Vice Consul with the Permanent Mission of the Philippines to the United Nations in Geneva. Hope is also a friend of the Chair on international cooperation mechanisms, together with Thomas Fetz and Trevor Smith from Canada, and hopefully we'll be able to speak a little bit more about progress on this mechanism. And the screen is yours, Hope. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jamie. And first, I'd like to thank UNIDIR for this opportunity to share with our participants what has been going on with the ICA mechanism and the efforts of the chair as well as the friends of the chair to fulfill the mandate of the Ninth Review Conference. And thank you, Ambassador Mayer and Ambassador Inden Bosch, for your preliminary remarks. But I do agree with what Ambassador Inden Bosch has said about the having a new mechanism under the BWC. As he has underscored, it has to be politically feasible, politically acceptable, technically feasible, and financially sustainable. So that also applies to a proposal of an international cooperation and assistance mechanism under Article 10 of the BWC. And as I have noticed in the participants, among the participants are the people I have worked with in the disarmament community here in Geneva. So I know that they may already be familiar with the discussion on ICA and Article 10 of the BWC. But let me just also again give an overview for the benefit of the others who have not really been deeply involved in the issue. So as have been expressed a while ago, it is the mandate of the Ninth Review Conference to have to establish a mechanism. Two mechanisms. One of which is the ICA mechanism, and as I can say, our proposal as a friend of the chair for Article 10 has been largely adopted from the other existing ICA mechanisms. For example, in the Arms Trade Treaty, where it has the voluntary trust fund mechanism, and also in the IAEA, which has a technical cooperation program. So our proposal has been mainly patterned on those existing work that has been done in other organizations, in other disarmament bodies. So as I have mentioned previously, we have presented this to the states parties of the BWC, and after much consultation with different groups. And the last that we have discussed this was in December of last year. And again, we received much comments and proposals from other states parties. And later on, I will discuss about the challenges, or I will present to you about the challenges that we have encountered or have been shared or have been expressed by the other delegations. So mainly for our proposal as Friends of the Chair, we have the proposal to establish an ICA mechanism which aims to fully implement the Article 10 of the BWC, or of the convention. And in this proposal, we have the ICA, or the International Cooperation and Assistance Program, that will facilitate the implementation of, for example, to find the potential or the best possible partnerships between the countries that offer programs for example, for biosafety, or for example, capacity building in terms of legislation to implement BWC. So those kinds of projects, and also those countries that need those kinds of capacity building or provisions, or as well as capacities in their own jurisdiction. And also we have the ICA. We also proposed an ICA plan of action, so it will have it will elaborate on what would be the program, or what would be the focus of the ICA program, for example, in the next 5 years during the intersessional, from one review conference to another. So this plan of action would allow to have a more focused approach based on the latest scientific developments. And as we know, science can be have a very advanced and rapid development, and this will enable us to have a more anticipated and focused approach, so that the implementation of the ICA program is how do you say this, is more proactive and not reactive, based on just the needs of the states parties, or of groups of states that have requested assistance from the program. And the implementation of the ICA program will also be assisted by a proposed ICA steering group. So it will be composed by 20 members from the states parties of the convention, and they will review the proposals and make recommendations to the larger states group of states parties, which is what we propose as ICA advisory group, to be endorsed or to be approved for funding. And we also propose the ICA fund, or the voluntary trust fund. We hope that the trust fund will enable us to have a sustainable ICA mechanism. So the funding will be through voluntary contributions from states parties and from other organizations that would like to help us in ensuring that the ICA mechanism is sustainable. Also, another mechanism, or another proposal that we hope will ensure the sustainability of the funding, is the cost-sharing contribution. So, for example, the cost-sharing contribution is if a state would receive a funding, for example, of $100,000, the state would have a 10% contribution, or have a 10% of the 100,000 as its contribution to the project. And for the LDCs, for the least developed countries, we propose that they have a 5% contribution for every funding that they will receive through the mechanism. And so with this discussion, this is where the challenges we have seen in the latest negotiations and deliberations of this proposal. First, I'd like to discuss is the ICA advisory group. So this has been also a focus of an issue in the discussions, because it's like forming another grouping, or another kind of a mechanism within the meeting of states parties of the BWC. So if I could address more of that if there's any question, but because of limited time, I would proceed with the challenges. And another one is the steering group, the selection of the members of the steering group. So since it's a 20-member state with periodic cycle, the question previously is, how will how will they be selected, in what method, in what way. But in the latest proposal, we have it proposed to have the UNSG High Representative for Disarmament as the person who will select the composition of the steering group. And then another issue is the voluntary funding. As you know, some states parties are not really are not in the position to make voluntary contributions, or voluntary contribution can be not can be it's not very definitive. Like, there's, unlike the assessed mandatory contribution, where states parties are obligated to pay to the convention, or to contribute to the convention based on the assessed amounts that were given to them by the UN, based on also on their economic conditions and situation. So that's another issue on how we can ensure the sustainability of the mechanism, either through state voluntary contribution, or through other organizations. And then the cost sharing, another issue as well, because of course not all states have the same level of economic development, and it might be difficult for other states to commit to the cost sharing condition of such ICA mechanism. But if I may also underscore, the cost sharing is not only in financial, but also in kind. So that's also one of our proposals in our mechanism. So I hope these topics, if we saw how challenging it could be during the last discussions in December, but I do hope that in the next sessions of the BWC, we can have a better appreciation of why such provisions, or why such proposals were made, and we can come to a middle ground, so that we can push forward and advance to the establishment of these mechanisms and the full implementation of the BWC. So I hope I did not get past the time limit, and thank you, Jamie.
Many thanks, Hope. I know you're perfectly within time. Thank you for providing the background to the Article 10 mechanism. I think some of the components, as well as some of the challenges that you mentioned around this, including selection of participants, voluntary funding, sustainability, and cost sharing. That's really useful. I think a really helpful refresher for colleagues. Okay, so thank you very much. I'd now like to turn to Peter Babagamuira Ahabwe, who is a technical advisor at the Ministry of Health of Uganda. Peter is also friend of the chair on Science and Technology Matters, along with, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Michael Kang from the Republic of Korea and Grizel Rodriguez from Panama. But Peter's here to talk about this, and perhaps, Peter, thank you for joining us. Perhaps you could provide an update of discussions around the science and technology mechanism, as well as perhaps science and technology more generally. And the floor is yours, Peter. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Jamie. Can you hear me?
Hear you loud and clear.
Okay, great. So, coming after Ambassador, Mayor, and Christina and Robert, really it's just adding on to the rich discussions that have been following the themes that were agreed on in the 9th Review Conference. So we've had a pause, yes, but I hope through this small intervention, I'll be able to remind us all about the mechanism, and then also talk a little bit about the rolling text, which, as Ambassador Mayor said, we've all been a part of. It's important from the outset to note that the mechanism is not just technical now, but it's also forward-looking an institutional tool that can help the convention keep pace with accelerating innovation in biology and associated sciences. So, as per its mandate, the 9th Review Conference tasked us to recommend a mechanism to review and assess scientific and technological developments relevant to the convention and to provide states parties with advice. And this is reflects a growing awareness that the Biological Weapons Convention cannot remain reactive in a world of very many new things. You know, we are looking at AI-assisted design, synthetic biology, rapidly evolving dual-use technologies, and more recently, you may have heard of mirror biology. So the aim is simple but essential, and it's to provide scientifically grounded, inclusive, and credible advice without decision-making authority. It's about vigilance, foresight, and support. So briefly walking through the mechanism, I would say it has three main components. One, there is the review group, which is the inclusive base, and it's open to all states parties, each nominating one expert. And ideally, it should meet once a year to monitor and assess priority topics. And this ensures there's diversity of views, geographic representation, and transparency, if we can all agree. The second component is the reporting committee, which would be the one that has the focused outputs, a group of 25 experts drawn from the review group and prepares focused findings and recommendations for states parties. Reflects both scientific depth and regional balance. Ideally, they would meet also during the year and report directly to the MSP, meeting of states parties. Of course, this is a proposal, and later on I talk about the challenges. Some of these provisions have been, challenged. Should we have more meetings? Should we have less meetings? Should one group report back to another group and then report back again before they report to the MSP? Then finally, the third component would be the temporary working group. You could think of this as the guys who do the deep dives or the deep research, and there would be short-term task-specific expert panels to explore emerging or complex areas, and they may include external experts, but only from states parties. So they are like the research targeted recommendations or horizon scans. So this helps for many of you who get concerned that can 25 people fully capture the scope of everything happening in science and technology. The temporary working groups would be the ones to buffer that. Then for governance, ideally they would have chair, 2 vice chairs. They would be supported by staff from the ISU. 3, these would be extra staff, and they would operate with strict codes of conduct, conflicts of interest policies, confidentiality rules to preserve independence and trust. So this structure would give us both breadth and depth, and an inclusive base, technical core, and the flexibility to respond to new developments as they arise. So there are some changes and opportunities in the S&T landscape. As we build the mechanism, it's important to recognize that science and technology landscape is not only fast changing, it's creating new opportunities for cooperation, innovation, and capacity building. Of course, there is a rise of decentralized research platforms which make life science innovation more accessible globally. There are advances in diagnostics, vaccine platform, mobile labs, and genomics, which can enhance national preparedness and support Article 7 assistance. And there's potential for AI-powered tools to transform everything from disease surveillance to forensic analysis if used responsibly. So ideally, the mechanism should offer us a way to track these opportunities, share the insights across borders, and make sure that the benefits of peaceful biology are widely and safely distributed, especially for countries still building scientific infrastructure. This isn't just about detecting threats, it's about positioning the convention as a steward of responsible innovation. So just continuing on to the rolling text, much of the proposed mechanism now has been echoed in the July 2025 rolling text, especially under the section on science and technological developments relevant to the convention. But I want to highlight a few new key things. Horizon scanning and early warning have been proposed as recommendations, and this really recognizes the need to anticipate disruptive technologies. States parties are encouraged in these recommendations to share national reflections, risks, opportunities. The rolling test also supports promotion of bioethics education, code of conduct, awareness raising tools, referencing specifically the Tianjin biosecurity guidelines as complementary to the mechanism educational roles. There's also explicit recognition of some key issues like synthetic biology and artificial intelligence as emerging areas. And importantly, there is a recognition of the importance of ISU being better empowered to organize formal panel sessions involving scientific experts, and also to be a more outward-facing arm of the convention by participating in meetings and conferences and things like that. So in short, the rolling text is not just aligned with the FOC proposal that was shared in December, but it reflects the logic, architecture, and the urgency. So to conclude, I want to emphasize that the mechanism is not an abstract idea. It's practical and ready to implement proposal. Of course, we have issues with cost. And again, this is where to use the analogy of the dog chasing the tail. It's like if you have 2 more meetings, let me say, one for each group, and then you're adding these 2 more meetings on the already existing calendar. If we now start requesting the groups to have report back and then report back again, those are 2 extra meetings, so the costs quickly ramp up. Of course, the technical working groups also represent a cost point, but then again, we have issues whereby if there's uncomfortability with external funding or extramural funding from outside, then how do we meet these costs? Because eventually they get shifted back to states parties. And again, if we also have the waivers to some states parties, then where would the extra money come from? So again, when you come back to the money question, I think the important thing is we need to really engage constructively. And even when we propose additions or subtractions or alternative things that need to be piled into the mechanism or the measures, we need to always think about, so how will that work feasibly? How will it keep within costs, and how will it be financed? Otherwise, we can come up with a very beautiful mechanism that is very impossible to implement. So as we prepare for the 6th session later, I hope we can agree on key elements such as establishing the mechanism, terms of reference, the membership model, timeline for operationalization, as this will not only fulfill our review conference mandate, but it will show that the Biological Weapons Convention is truly capable of governing the life sciences with both caution and confidence. In doing so, we can show that it's not just responsive to risks, but it's responsive to change. And we are creating a space where science and security can evolve together in service of peace and global cooperation, which really is our shared goal and vision. Thank you so much, Jamie.
Many thanks, Peter. You briefly cut out at one point, but it was only very brief, and I think otherwise it's all good and very clear. And I appreciate you taking the time to provide an overview of the mechanism, but also S&T more generally, including some of the positive benefits of science and technology. I should also add, Peter, I rather like your phrase on positioning the convention as a steward of responsible innovation. That may be appearing in subsequent papers attributed to you at some point. With that, I would like to move to the discussion session where we'd welcome your views, your input. This can be done through the Q&A function, which should be accessible from the bottom of your screen. We have a couple of questions in there, and I'll make a start, and perhaps I can direct the first to Ambassador Indenbosch first of all, because it's directed to you. And the question reads as follows. Could Ambassador Indenbosch share about how states parties view the role of academics and relevant industry? What role can they play in developing and operationalizing a potential verification mechanism? Perhaps if I could put it to you first, Ambassador, but then if anybody else wants to follow, that would be great. The screen is yours, Rob.
Thank you very much, Naeem, and thanks for this excellent question. state parties in general. Let me, in particular, take my own country, the Netherlands, whether it's cyber, whether it's space, whether it's AI or the BWC, the Netherlands is always in favor of a multi-stakeholder approach. And of course, academics and industry are part of that, most certainly also with regard to the BWC. For instance, with academics, I would like to refer to the International Science Council. They recently, again, worked on a report on compliance and verification. It was said earlier, we have to have something that is politically acceptable, but also technically feasible and financially affordable. And there comes in also academics, for instance, to further develop data analysis so that we can improve what we can get out of off-site inspections. Industry comes in also, because if we come to some kind of a verification mechanism, it has to be doable, not only affordable but also doable, and we have of course to take into account issues like intellectual property rights. It's not an easy topic, and we have to involve industry to come up with something that can be done in practice, but that can also be done in practice credibly, because we don't want to give false assurances by developing a system that we are still inspecting a number of facilities, but we are not sure whether that will be the right one. So there we could also use assistance from industry. If you look at the proposals that have now been circulated by the chair, we have, for instance, in number 25, that reads, the working group encourages state parties on a voluntary basis to organize and or take part in the trial practice application of compliance and verification measures in close cooperation with the relevant industries. This, in fact, it's already in the text. So let me stop with this, and looking forward to any further questions.
Thank you, Ambassador. Did anybody else wish to take on that particular question or follow up on remarks from Ambassador Inderbosch at all? I see not. So perhaps I can move to another question which has just been submitted, and it's sort of at the end of an extended quote. So I'll read a bit of the quote and then put the question. Perhaps if I could begin with you, Hope, and then turn to Ambassador Meyer. The quote is as follows: to ensure responsible exchanges, preventing diversion and misuse, while fully respecting the sovereign rights of states parties to Article 3 and 4. These are points which this participant thinks are important. And second point it raises, to maintain coherence with existing frameworks, upholding the legitimacy of export control regimes and avoiding overlap with compliance measures or other disarmament agreements. There's 2 points there. And the question then goes, or the question comment then goes on to read, the recommendation for an ICA and the elements of an ICA mechanism should align with each other. So perhaps a question for Hope then as to how do we achieve this? How do they go together? Or does it mean the recommendations complement the mechanism to be established? How can we ensure they co-work smoothly? Perhaps I could turn to you, Hope, to take that, and then perhaps to Peter or Ambassador Meyer. Please, Hope, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jamie. I do agree that we also recognize the importance of existing mechanisms as well as the provisions in the convention. In our proposal that we circulated previously, and also as reflected in the chair's proposal of the mechanism, we recall the decisions of the previous review conferences on Articles 3 and 4, as well as the importance of export controls in terms of ensuring that the transfers, whether direct or indirect, of the, for example, biological materials, are only for their intended purposes, and to ensure that they are not in violation of the provisions of the convention. And thank you as well for raising the elements. I was not able to elaborate more on that in my presentation a while ago, but yes, they do complement each other. The elements that were included in the rolling text of the chair of the July rolling text, as well as in our proposal, or in the proposal for an ICA mechanism. In fact, those how do I say, mechanisms that are proposed in the elements would help or would facilitate the full implementation of Article 10 and of the ICA mechanism. For example, there's a proposal to establish an international biosecurity education network, a laboratory network, and a capacity building fellowship program for the states parties. So these are mechanisms, or these are networks that would complement the ICA, the mainstreaming of the ICA mechanism. Actually, right now, there's already an existing mechanism to have a collaboration and partnership among states to implement an international and cooperation assistance under Article 10, which is the database for capacity building under the PWC. However, it's not as mainstreamed, and I do personally think that we could do more with that through a larger or a more mainstream ICA mechanism to be complemented by the networks proposed in the elements paper. And also in the elements, in the rolling text proposed in July, there's this provision on the national contact points of the states parties to communicate or to coordinate with the working group in terms of the needs of the states parties, and in terms of updating the national strategies of states parties to fully implement the convention. So I think that's important to identify focal points, or maybe focal agencies that are really involved in the implementation of the convention. So right now, we do have in our country, for example, we have a national contact point, which is our Ministry of Foreign Affairs. But I'm not sure with other states parties how establishes that. So I guess we could have more reinforced establishment of that kind of network that can help sustain the implementation of the international cooperation and assistance between the states parties.
Many thanks. Thank you, Hope, for responding to that. If anybody else wished to take the floor on complementarity of measures, please go ahead. Otherwise, I have a question to put to Ambassador Mayer. Oh, Peter, please go ahead.
Yeah. So for me, first of all, it's a very good question. How do recommendations and the mechanism work together? And me just even thinking about it from the point of view of even S&T as a mechanism and its recommendations, I think one, it's important to clarify the relationship. So mechanisms are the structure, and recommendations are really the policy content. So mechanisms cover things like the institutional setup. For example, do you have a database, focal points, roles, reporting lines? Well, recommendations are really the operational principles or the policy guidance that inform how the mechanism should work together. And I think it's a very sticky point, because sometimes people bring up a point and recommendations during a discussion on mechanisms, and vice versa, which kind of slows things down a bit. But they really need to align. The recommendations are not separate, but they are really what populate and guide the mechanism. Secondly, I think it's important to design the mechanism to internalize the recommendations. So we shouldn't have hanging recommendations that don't link back or circle back into the mechanism. So if you want to handle foresight, how does that fit into the mechanism? If it's a temporary working group, then you've linked the two. So basically, it's like hanging points. So recommendations need to circle and land into the mechanism so they intertwine. And also, it's important that any decision, support tools, templates, or guidance that are produced by the mechanisms are derived from agreed recommendations, so that there is no creation of parallel structures. And then finally, avoiding duplication and overlap. If a topic is handled in some capacity in one place, it's important to ask, what have we left out that could be the other side? And basically, at the end of the day, as I've learned from the diplomats, it's all in the language and the devil's in the details. Over.
Many thanks, Peter. Perhaps I could turn to you, Ambassador Mayer, now, if you want to respond to any of those points. But so we have a question here which follows on from an earlier question on academic involvement. Specifically, are there areas in Friends of the Chair discussions where information gaps have been identified, and therefore there are topics that be useful for civil society commentators to prepare briefings to help stimulate debate? Welcome your thoughts on this or any other comments you may have, Ambassador Mayer, please.
Well, my comment, I'll give back the ball to the civil society or NGOs or whatever. I think that it's up to them to identify in our work where are the gaps. Because I think that if we say where are the gaps, we're controlling the work of the NGOs and the civil society, no? I think I'm open to listen to them and to say, the universities, academics, and where we need to complement our work. So I think that's up to the civil society to identify where we should do better.
Thank you. A fair response. Did you want to follow up on any other comments or points and previous interventions at all? Or does anybody else?
No.
Thank you, Pastor. Anybody else wish to follow up on the question of possible gaps that you may see? I see Ambassador Endenbosch, you're unmuted. Did you want to take the floor, sir?
Thank you very much. And many thanks to Richard also for this question. Well, I would say two things. On the one hand, yes, there are, of course, information gaps. On the other hand, it's an overwhelming, I would almost say, flood of information. And there's also needs to make that accessible. And I think this was, of course, what we were doing with having those workshops. But we, for instance, had also the GCSP involved here in Geneva in organizing a seminar workshop here. I saw that, for instance, the Forecasting Research Institute is now also trying to do work with regard to the Biological Weapons Convention. I think we could still do with some more information with regard to how big data and artificial intelligence could help us to develop new, more modern forms of verification. I think UNIDIR has been doing work with regard to compiling possible verification regimes in a way by traditional means and less traditional means. What would bring it? How would they be able to reinforce each other in a way that we get something which is again politically acceptable, technically feasible, and financially affordable? So yeah, there is still a lot of work to be done, and I think we could really do with the assistance because still, as I said earlier, for the last 20 years, not too much has happened. And then, of course, we got a great impetus into the discussion. And now we have to take it up from there I would say, in the coming years after the review conference, when we have this mandate for whatever it will be, whether it will be an open-ended working group or something else, to make progress. And indeed, there's also a link, of course, to the science and technology mechanism. This was why we had this discussion at the end of last year. Well, things went a bit different than some of us might have expected. But we, the facilitators, with regard to compliance and verification, we had high expectations also from the science and technology mechanism in assisting us defining measures and recommendations for the review conference. That's it from my side.
Thank you, Ambassador. I wonder, Peter or Hope, did you want to follow up? Peter, you've unmuted, so I'm assuming that's a yes. Please, the screen's yours.
Yeah. So first of all, I think it's such a brilliant question. What's the role of academia? I think one important thing to note is that the largest group of people who will be forming the discussions, the convention, will be diplomats. That means there's a lot of room for civil society in the details. For example, even if we do agree that we need foresight and horizon scanning, we also need people to come up with practical models and do the field testing and say that if we wanted to do this, there are these 6 different ways. We ran these different trials and we found that this is the most affordable and feasible way of doing it. Even with governance of emerging and converging technologies. There are topics like AI, biological interfaces, gene editing, things of the like. But a few delegations may have the technical depth on some of these topics, and academics and research centers can really come up writing briefs and things like that. And always, for me, the most important thing I've learned in this work is that national implementation, at the end of the day, will be the work of the foot soldiers. And that means that the civil society will be the people that will take the things and the conversations in Geneva all the way through the last mile to the individual citizens of our big planet. So education, codes of conduct, non-promotion, all these things that can happen at the national level, will rely on them to drive that kind of thing over.
Many thanks, Peter. I should clarify, UNIDIR did not write this question, nor did we submit it, but we are very interested in the answer and very much appreciated. Perhaps I can turn now to you, Hope. I think you wanted to take the floor, please. The screen is yours.
Thank you, Jamie. Yeah, I think instead of UNIDIR, I think it was ISU, and with the help of the international scientific experts group that did some kind of a study about what could be the gaps and the possible ways forward in the establishment of a mechanism, of an ICA mechanism and an SNT mechanism. But if I think if anyone's interested, ISU can also be contacted on that information. But yeah, I guess in terms of the gap for the academic sector, well, it's more applicable on the SNT mechanism. But I think for the ICA mechanism, what could be the possible gap is that, for example, there could be some research or findings that is already existing or have been done some like a couple of years ago that were not able to be maximized or optimized by within their countries or by the governments, and that is where the ICA mechanism could have a role, for example, in building the capacities of these academic institutions and of their governments as well. To how do we uh, take this opportunity that these studies present to the government in terms of building their capacities, in terms of effective implementation of the convention. So I guess not all countries have the enough resources or funding to take advantage and to optimize and maximize what their scientists, what their academicians could offer. So I'm speaking on behalf of someone from a developing country, for example. We do have a good scientists, we do have a good researchers, but what do we do with their findings or their studies if our government doesn't have enough funding or resources to explore or to have to make use of those kinds of outputs from our experts. So I guess that's where the gaps could be worked on, and also I think another gap is what a mapping of what other organizations have been doing, whether internationally or domestically, because some civil society organizations or some think tanks or other educational organizations have been doing a lot of things, but it's difficult to map them, and there's no like a sole database for such. So I guess that can be worked on further in the future and can also be wondered about by other states parties, other delegations, on how we can maximize what has been done and what has been doing by the others. So thank you.
Thank you. I think there's some food for thought there for us as well. If I do remember correctly, I think the IASU had a space for resources from academia and think tanks and various bodies. I think it was called the Think Zone, which actually may be something to consider. And certainly that was the last review conference. I think that's a potentially useful resource. If I could perhaps change tack a little bit and perhaps put a question to Ambassador Meyer, and this relates to some of the suggestions around a special conference. I think there was an expectation if the working group achieves consensus by 2025, there would be the possibility of the special conference idea, and I wondered whether you had thoughts on the possibility of that under the current circumstances, or any reflections on that aspect for perhaps for 2026. The screen is yours, sir.
Well, thank you. Well, Ed, I understand the special conference is not it's in my domain. You see, it's up to countries to decide to have the special conference. You see, do I think it could happen this year, next year? I don't know. You see, because I don't want to refrain from answering some questions and talk to some issues. But the thing is, I'm in the hands of the countries. You see, as the last phrase that I just reading that I said, the success of this process depends on the collective responsibility of membership and on the sense of purpose inspired by the urgency of the emergency risks. So, I think, and I've been mentioned this, that countries can work professionally, and everybody has a sense of responsibility, because what happened last December cannot happen again. You see, we cannot end a meeting without a result, because we decided to have this meeting. We decided to strengthen the convention. So we all have to be on board, you see. But I cannot impose the state parties meetings and so on. It's not my decision. It's the decision of the countries. And I think that with the effort of the Friends of the Chair, of the ISU, of Leandro, and so on, we put out a paper. And what this paper is what we felt that where countries want to go, of course, and trying to have a consensus. And once more, consensus in multilateral exercise is something that nobody likes, but everybody can live with. And that's where we want to go. It's all the Dutch inputs going to be there? No. So is Ambassador Robert going to be sad? Yes, but he's going to be happy because other things are there. The same thing goes with Uganda, with Brazil, with Philippines, with Uruguay, Argentina, And so are we going to have a state parties? It's up to the states to decide. I have my own opinion, but I keep it for myself.
I'm very curious now. Ambassador Indenbosch, you've just been mentioned, and I actually have a question I wanted to put to you about the rolling text. Within that text, there is a proposal to establish the open-ended working group that you mentioned, and it's something you've raised in the past, I think, in your work with Alonso. But I'm wondering, how could this group sort of build on previous work in the BWC? And what are the sort of synergies that could be established with things like the UN Secretary General's investigative mechanism? The screen's yours, Ambassador.
Thank you very much for that question, which is very appropriate, of course. Yes, let me underline that indeed a lot of work has been done, but it has been done some time ago. And we have to be realistic. So the Varix work in 91 gave us, in the end, 21 possible measures. But in the end, when the negotiations started on the verification regime, there was no consensus reached. But of course, there was a lot of thinking power that has gone into that. And my idea would be that let's have a fresh look at it. We are not taking up where we left 20 years ago. Because people who propose that to me, I always say, yes, that's great. If you make sure that of, what was it, 1100 brackets, you get rid of 1056, and we take on the last 44. Well, that won't happen, of course. But indeed, let's have a fresh look at, for instance, what was proposed and how those measures will fit in the different surroundings I already described with regard to the bioscience landscape. And then with regard to the mechanism, I think quite a number of delegations refer to it, and also the Netherlands nationally always brings up this point. And I think also the chair in earlier interventions already mentioned that we, of course, should be aware what already exists, and we should avoid duplication, because we should be realistic. Again, one of the three criteria in a way is that it should also be financially affordable, and it's already difficult enough to get the money in to have our annual meetings. And if we set up more than we have now, we will need more money, and we will need to convince all the state parties also to come up with that. At this moment, the Secretary General mechanism fulfills an important niche that can substantially strengthen a broader set of compliance and verification measures. For us, I think it will be that it provides a credible means also to conduct on-site investigations in response to alleged use of biological weapons, which is currently lacking in the convention. At this moment, the mechanism is the only thing we have with regard to verification. And it helps to address one of the clear-cut scenarios, biological weapons use. And there we need, of course, compliance and verification measures in the context of the convention. And of course, we will need to develop also ways to monitor and verify complication with other provisions with regard to the also the development of biological and toxic weapons themselves. So on the one hand, we have, of course, the mechanism, but the mechanism is very much on the use. And here we talk about compliance and verification of the convention. That would, of course, be also with regard to possible production and development. So that would clearly be a wider scope, and it will be an addition to what we have at the moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. And I think you are correct. It was in the region of 1,100 left square brackets. There is, for reasons I'm not quite clear of, a different number of right square brackets, if I remember from going through the text in the past. But thank you for the response. And perhaps I could turn to you now, Hope, on the issue of Article 10. And one thing which I've been struck has been challenging, a sort of long-standing point of divergence, is the issue of export controls. And I understand there was some discussion on this in moving into the meetings in November, December last year. But I wonder if you could elaborate on how you see this issue fitting into any mechanism moving forward. Please, the screen is yours, madam.
Thank you very much, Jamie, and thank you for that important questions. Yes, we do recognize that some delegations have raised this issue of export controls, and they think that it is not consistent with the full implementation of Article 10 of the convention, while other states parties argue or state that it is an existing mechanism and it is the right of other states to impose such export controls in order to ensure that like dual use goods or other materials are not transferred for purposes that they are not intended to be used for. So as for our proposal of the mechanisms, as a recognition of this issue, we propose that if there's any issues that a state party would like to raise in the matter of any obstacles or of any concerns with regard to the full implementation of Article 10 of the convention, there's the ICA advisory group that will be formed after the MSP for them to listen to those issues that could be raised. And I guess that's how we see that the issue of any concerns on the transfers or any obstacles that they think impede them from fully implementing the Article 10 can be raised. And I would just like to take this opportunity as well that as a friend of the chair, we don't see that the mechanism has this kind of mandate of addressing such issues, but we do recognize that states would like to have it raised and that they see that it is connected with the Article 10 of the convention. So we do propose that to have space for that. And if they would like to speak on that matter, then they are free to do so. But of course, this is just a proposed mechanism. And as much as we would like for this to be agreed upon by consensus and to be established as soon as possible, we recognize the point of contention of other states parties, and we tried our best, me and Thomas, to address the concerns and to find the middle ground in these contentious topics. So I guess that's the best way that I can respond to that question. And yeah, if there's any further need for elaboration, I'm open to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Hope, and thank you indeed for taking on what is, I know, quite a difficult question that I threw at you there. It's much appreciated. If anybody has any other questions, please do submit these to the Q&A function. We will wrap up shortly, but I think we still have a little bit more time. In the meantime, though, perhaps I could turn to you, Peter, with a sort of two-part question, if I may. And the first is, you mentioned this before when talking about some of the rolling text activities, but your experience with tools like Foresight and your sort of the options for that, I wonder whether you could elaborate a little bit on that. And then, Peter, a second question, and perhaps if I can be a little bit blunt here as the S&T expert here, I wonder what bothers you in terms of science and technology? What sort of keeps you awake at night in terms of your perception of the risks and the threats? I'd be curious to get your view on that. Please, Peter, the screen is yours.
Thanks, Jamie. So for me, as a pharmacist, as someone who works in outbreaks every day, as someone who does border surveillance, there is a huge speed access gap. Having an opportunity to participate in conversations in Geneva and almost immediately as soon as I get home, be sent to an outbreak of cholera or Ebola or go to some border to do surveillance, there is a huge gap between speed and access. Like in real life, things are happening much, much faster than the speed at which we're having conversations about them. So for me, I worry about the next COVID-19 I worry about if eventually, AI we achieve AGI, and then you have all these AI designed things. I worry about environmental contamination with mirror biology, and then we are now planning to do cleanup, yet we haven't even defined a mechanism. So for me, I really worry that on the ground, things are happening at a much faster pace than our words.
Thank you, Peter. I think that's a helpful dose of realism for all of us here. So thank you for raising that. I am conscious of the time, and I'd like to give all our panelists an opportunity to provide some closing thoughts. So I'd suggest if we take these in reverse order, and perhaps I can give the screen back to you again, Peter, for any final thoughts you may have, or any expectations, or perhaps if you have a particular wish or hope for the upcoming 6th session of the working group, which starts in a couple of weeks, or any recommendations. But please, Peter, the screen is yours for any closing thoughts.
First of all, Ambassador Mayor's infectious optimism caught on to me. I really hope that by March 2026, when we are still within the 50-year window, we might be able to have this special conference. We might be able to launch the 2 mechanisms, and we might be able to have some concrete things so that when I go back home and my son asks me, so what did you do when you were away for 3 weeks? I'll tell him we launched a mechanism for science and technology. We launched a mechanism for international cooperation and assistance. And over the next couple of years, some solid work on the Biological Weapons Convention is going to happen. It's going to have some teeth. Over.
Great. Thank you very much, Peter, particularly for ending on such an optimistic note. It's most welcome. Perhaps I can turn to you now. Please, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much, Jamie. Well, I could just say, because in my previous life, I worked on something like an international cooperation and assistance work, but it's more on the socio-political aspect in back in the Philippines. So I guess that kind of experience helped me, very much helped me in this drafting of the proposal for an ICA mechanism. So it has been a really great work for me personally, and it's at the same time very difficult. I know that other delegations have their own interests and would really fight for those interests to be catered to in this mechanisms. But I personally do appreciate it, and all the delegations have been doing good work for the interest of their countries. So, but hopefully we'll pass the stage of really tough negotiations and find a common ground, a middle ground for us all, so that we could finally establish these mechanisms and strengthen the BWC as mandated to us by the 9th Review Conference like 3 years ago. So thank you for this work, Jamie, for UNIDIR, for keeping the discussion alive and for the discourse to continue. And yes, see you next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hope, and thank you for taking the time to join us. I should also add, and continue in the optimistic note of the closing remarks so far. So no pressure, but Ambassador Ndenbosch, you are next in line, and please, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Jamie, and many thanks to UNIDIR for organizing this webinar. I think it's been very useful for me, and I hope it was also useful for the participants. I consider it a kind of an appetizer for the discussion we are going to have as of the 11th of August. Let me also thank the participants for some really good and inspiring questions. And then indeed, trying to wrap up from my side, I was posted in The Hague somewhere in the half of my career 20 years ago, when this discussion went on compliance and verification, and very much on even establishing an OPBW. That was not possible. We are now more than 20 years further. I'm at the very end of my career. This is to be my last posting. And indeed, it would be great if we would have at least recommendations, measures proposed to the review conference in 2027, the year of my retirement, with regard to compliance and verification. And let us all work to make that happen. Thank you.
Sorry, I've muted. Thank you very much, Ambassador Inderbosch. And the final word to you, Ambassador Meyer, please. The screen is yours, sir.
Well, I'm very happy that my optimism is spraying all over the room, or all over the screen. But what I'm saying is going to say, it's very obvious. It's up to us to do something real work. Of course, each country has their national positions. We all know this. We are all professionals. We know how those things are. There are red lines from some delegations, and then those red lines can become pink and can become white. And I do hope that this time, this next week, delegations will come to Geneva with a very positive attitude, and that we can accomplish our work. It's going to be very bad if we don't do it, So I'm very hopeful as usual, and I think that everybody will arrive here after vacations, summer vacations from the northern hemisphere, with a very good attitude of accomplishing our work. Are we going to finalize with a wonderful solution? No. Will everybody like it? No. But we can come up with something. And that's and once more, thank you for UNIDIR for making this meeting. Thank you.
Many thanks, Ambassador, and thank you for joining and taking the time to feed into this discussion. Indeed, thank you to all of our panelists. Just before closing, if I could encourage you to complete an online feedback form. It takes a couple of minutes. It is anonymous, and you can find the link in the chat or on your screen. I think there's a QR code as well. It does help us in terms of moving forward and trying to improve our events, so please do let us know what you think. I'd also really like to take this opportunity to thank all of our speakers today, to Peter, to Hope, to Robert, as well as to UNODA and the Friends of the Chair that's collaborated with us over the course of this series. And of course, many thanks to you, Ambassador Meyer, and the Brazilian team, particularly Leandro, your left and your right hand, to use your phrase from earlier. Just from our side, I'd like to thank the UNIDIR colleagues who supported the production of this event, specifically Luison and Maria. And thank you finally to all of you for joining us online. A reminder, all the previous events in this series are also available. If there is interest, we also hope to continue these discussions. And at some point, as well as a bit of news for people's information, we'll be initiating a similar sort of set of discussions ahead of the MPT review conference next year. So please do watch this space. And with that, I wish you all a good afternoon for those of you here in Geneva, or good day or good night, depending on where this finds you online. And thank you all very much.